"He is mentally incompetent," my dad screamed in court. I stayed silent. The judge leaned forward and asked, "You really don't know who he is?" His attorney froze. Dad's face went pale. "Wait. What?" "Before I tell you the massive secret the judge revealed that completely destroyed my father's life, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Thank you for being here. Grab a warm cup of coffee, sit back, and listen as I tell you the whole story." The courtroom was suffocatingly quiet. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, pressing against your eardrums. The only sound was the rhythmic tapping of the court reporter's fingers on her machine. I sat at the defense table, my hands resting flat on the polished mahogany. I didn't fidget. I didn't look down. I just stared straight ahead, letting the cool metal of my watch press against my wrist. Across the aisle, my father, Carter, was putting on the performance of a lifetime. His face was a terrifying shade of crimson, the veins in his neck bulging against the collar of his expensive custom-tailored shirt. He was pacing back and forth, waving a thick stack of papers in the air like a weapon. He was a lawyer and the courtroom was his stage. But today he wasn't defending a client. He was trying to destroy his own son. "He needs a conservatorship, Your Honor," Carter bellowed, pointing a shaking, accusatory finger directly at my chest. "Look at him. He is an embarrassment to our family legacy. He is 29 years old, living in a shoebox apartment, working some imaginary consulting job that doesn't pay a real salary. He is deeply unstable. He is a danger to himself, and if the court does not intervene, he is going to blow his entire inheritance on his delusions." I didn't blink. I just watched him. I watched the man who was supposed to protect me actively try to erase my freedom. He wanted the court to declare me legally insane. He wanted total control over my bank accounts, my medical decisions, my life. Next to him, his attorney, a greasy guy named Eli, was frantically scrolling through a digital dossier on his tablet. Eli was supposed to be Carter's bulldog, the guy who intimidated witnesses into submission. But right now, Eli was sweating. I could see a bead of moisture rolling down his temple. The bailiff had just handed Eli a sealed envelope from the judge, and whatever he was reading on that paper was making his hands shake. Judge Samuel sat high behind the bench. He was an older man, late 60s, with a face carved from stone and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He let Carter rant for another full minute. He let my father dig his own grave word by word, shout by shout. "My son cannot be trusted to make basic life decisions," Carter yelled, slamming his hand on the podium. "He is catatonic. Look at him. He hasn't spoken a single word to defend himself because he knows I am right. He needs psychiatric help, and he needs it today." Judge Samuel slowly picked up his wooden gavel. He didn't bang it. He just held it in his hand, letting the weight of the wood rest on the desk. He looked at my father, then looked at me, and then turned his gaze back to Carter. "Are you quite finished, Mr. Caldwell?" the judge asked. His voice was incredibly calm, but it carried a chilling authority that instantly sucked the air out of the room. Carter straightened his tie, breathing heavily. "I am just trying to save my son, Your Honor." "Save your son," Judge Samuel repeated slowly. He put on his reading glasses and picked up the paper the bailiff had provided. He read it silently for a few seconds. The tension in the room snapped tight. You could hear a pin drop. Then the judge lowered the paper. He looked over the rim of his glasses directly at my father. "Mr. Caldwell, you really don't know who he is, do you?" Carter blinked. The arrogant sneer wiped off his face, replaced by genuine confusion. "Excuse me? He is my son. He is a sick boy who needs—" "Stop talking," Judge Samuel ordered. It wasn't a request. Eli, my father's lawyer, suddenly made a sound like a choking dog. He grabbed Carter's sleeve, pulling him backward. "Carter," Eli whispered frantically, his voice trembling so hard I could hear it from my table. "Carter, shut up. Look at the document. Look at the signature." Carter yanked his arm away, glaring at Eli. "What are you doing?" "I am making a point to the judge." "Wait." "What?" Carter muttered, finally looking down at the paper Eli was shoving into his chest. His face went pale, ghost white, the blood completely drained from his cheeks. How did we get here? How did a father and son end up on opposite sides of a courtroom, fighting for my basic human rights? To understand the trap I had just sprung on him, you have to go back. You have to see the rot beneath the shiny surface of my family. It started long before that day in court. The resentment in my family didn't explode overnight. It was a slow poison. My father, Carter, was a prominent lawyer in the city. He built his identity on the image of success. He wore $1,000 suits, drove luxury cars, and belonged to the most exclusive country club in town. To the outside world, he was a pillar of the community. Behind closed doors, he was a tyrant who demanded absolute perfection, and I was his biggest disappointment. I was never the son he wanted. I didn't want to be a cutthroat attorney. I liked numbers. I liked puzzles. I became a forensic accountant. I tracked down missing money, exposed corporate fraud, and audited massive supply chains. It was quiet, behind-the-scenes work. But to Carter, if your name wasn't on a billboard or the front page of the newspaper, you were a nobody. The real star of the family was my older brother, Julian. Julian was the golden child. He was handsome, charming, and possessed an incredible talent for spending money he didn't earn. I remember last Thanksgiving vividly. The dining room smelled like roasted turkey and expensive red wine. My mother, Vivian, had spent the entire week decorating the house to look like a magazine cover. We were all sitting around the long mahogany table. I was quietly eating my mashed potatoes when Julian walked in, twirling a shiny new key fob around his finger. "Just picked her up today," Julian announced, flashing a $1 million smile. "Ferrari 488, cherry red." The dealer practically begged me to take it off the lot. My mother clapped her hands together, her eyes shining with pride. "Oh, Julian, that is wonderful. You work so hard. Sweetie, you deserve to treat yourself." I almost choked on my water. Julian didn't work hard. Julian didn't work at all. He called himself an entrepreneur, which was just a fancy word for launching startup companies that crashed and burned every 6 months, usually taking my father's money down with them. He had never drawn a real salary in his life. Carter raised his glass of scotch, beaming at Julian. "To my eldest son, a man who knows how to command respect on the road and in life." They clinked glasses. Then Carter's eyes slid over to me. The warmth vanished from his face, replaced by that familiar, cold judgment. "And what about you, Mason?" Carter asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "Still playing around with your little spreadsheets? Still doing that consulting thing?" I set my fork down. "I'm a forensic accountant, Dad. I run my own firm now. We just signed a major contract." I didn't mention it was a massive promotion, a federal contract worth millions. I knew better than to share my victories in this house. They would only be minimized. Carter actually laughed. It was a sharp, mocking sound. He tossed his napkin onto the table. "A firm? You work out of your apartment, Mason. Is that what we are calling unemployed these days? A consultant? It's a cute hobby, son. But let's be real. You don't have a stable salary. You don't have a real career. You are playing pretend." Julian smirked, cutting into his turkey. "Come on, Dad. Take it easy on him. Not everyone has the drive to be a CEO. Some people are just meant to be background characters." I felt the heat rising in my neck. I looked at my mother, hoping for just a tiny ounce of defense. But Vivian just took a sip of her wine and refused to meet my eyes. She always took their side. Always. "I'm doing fine," I said quietly, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Doing fine isn't the Caldwell way," Carter snapped. "You are an embarrassment, Mason. A 29-year-old man who can't even afford a decent car. It's pathetic." I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just picked up my fork and continued eating. Let them think I was a failure. Let them believe I was broke. The truth was, my cute little hobby was bringing in more money in a single month than Carter's law firm made in a year. But I kept my mouth shut. Silence was my armor. The Thanksgiving dinner was just a symptom of a much deeper disease. The real fracture happened a few years earlier, right after my grandmother's funeral. My grandmother was the only person in the family who truly saw me. She knew Carter was a narcissist and she knew Julian was a parasite. When she passed away, the reading of the will dropped a nuclear bomb on the Caldwell family. She left the bulk of her estate, a massive trust fund, an inheritance worth millions, entirely to me. She left Carter a vintage watch, and she left Julian nothing. Zero. The day we found out, Carter threw a glass against the wall in the lawyer's office. He demanded they contest the will. He claimed my grandmother wasn't in her right mind. But the paperwork was ironclad. The money was mine. That inheritance put a target on my back. And Julian was the first one to take a shot. At the time, I was engaged to a woman named Chloe. We had been together for 3 years. She was beautiful, ambitious, and I thought she loved me. But Chloe had a weakness for shiny things and high status. After the funeral, when the tension in the family was at an all-time high, Julian started hanging around my apartment more often. He would show up in his expensive suits, talking about his fake business deals, flashing his credit cards. One Tuesday evening, I came home early from work. The apartment was completely silent. I walked into the bedroom and saw Chloe's closet doors wide open. Half her clothes were gone. Her suitcases were missing. Sitting on the kitchen counter was a folded piece of paper and my engagement ring. The note was brief. "Mason, I'm sorry. I just can't do this anymore. You are too quiet, too stagnant. I need someone with ambition. I'm leaving with Julian." I stood in the empty kitchen for an hour, just staring at the piece of paper. My brother, my own flesh and blood. He didn't even want Chloe. He just wanted to prove he could take something from me. He wanted to punish me for getting the inheritance. I called my mother. I needed someone to talk to, someone to tell me this was wrong. "Mom," I said, my voice cracking. Chloe left me. She moved in with Julian. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Vivian sighed. Not a sigh of sympathy, but a sigh of annoyance. "Well, Mason, you have to look at it from her perspective. Julian has a bright future. He's charismatic. He's going places. You isolate yourself. You can't blame a woman for wanting security." My chest tightened. Security? Mom, Julian is broke. He drained his college fund 10 years ago. He lives off Dad's credit cards. I'm the one with a steady job. "Don't raise your voice at me," she scolded sharply. "Your brother is trying his best. Maybe if you shared some of that grandmother's money with him, he wouldn't have to struggle so much. You're being very selfish, Mason." I hung up the phone. I didn't cry. I didn't break anything. Cold, hard realization settled over me. I had no family. I just had a group of people who shared my DNA, and they only valued me for what they could extract from me. From that day on, I locked my emotions away. I threw myself entirely into my work. I decided that if they wanted to see me as a weak, invisible failure, I would let them. I would become a ghost. As a forensic accountant, my job is to follow the money. People lie, but numbers always tell the truth. About a year after Chloe left, I was hired to audit a medium-sized corporate firm that was going through a messy bankruptcy. During the investigation, I had to trace a series of wire transfers to various external vendors. One of those vendors was Caldwell and Associates, my father's law firm. I sat at my computer late one night, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my glasses. I pulled up the financial records for Carter's firm. Since they were a vendor in a federal audit, their public financial disclosures were fair game. I started digging, just out of curiosity at first. What I found made my blood run cold. Carter wasn't just struggling. He was financially drowning. His firm was bleeding cash from every pore. He was 3 months behind on payroll. He had taken out massive, high-interest loans from shady creditors just to keep the lights on. He was paying off old debt with new debt, a classic Ponzi structure. But the worst part was the malpractice. I dug deeper into the public court records. Carter was losing cases left and right. He had completely botched a massive divorce settlement for a high-profile client because he missed a filing deadline. He was facing 2 separate lawsuits for legal negligence. He was commingling client funds with his operating accounts to pay his personal country club dues. He was a fraud. The expensive suits, the dinners, the cigars, it was all built on a mountain of toxic debt and lies. I wanted to know exactly how deep the hole was. I knew Carter's ego better than anyone. He believed he was the smartest man in any room. He thought he was untouchable. So I tried a simple trick. I accessed the firm's client portal login page. For the username, I typed his email. For the password, I typed Carter1. The screen loaded. Access granted. I leaned back in my chair, disgusted. His password was his own name and the number 1. It was pathetic. I navigated through his internal ledgers. The numbers were catastrophic. He needed at least $500,000 just to avoid bankruptcy and keep his law license from being revoked. He was cornered, and a cornered animal is dangerous. I printed out the ledgers, put them in a secure file on my encrypted hard drive, and logged out. I knew it was only a matter of time before the bomb exploded. A normal father would have called his family, admitted his failures, and asked for help. A humble man would have downsized his lifestyle, sold the big house, and started over. But Carter was not a normal father, and he was definitely not humble. A few weeks later, I went to my parents' house to pick up some old boxes I had left in the attic. The house was quiet. Carter's Porsche wasn't in the driveway, so I assumed they were out. I let myself in with my old key. As I was walking past the heavy oak doors of Carter's home office, I heard voices. The bank rejected the loan extension, Vivian. We are out of options. It was Carter. He sounded exhausted, desperate. I stopped dead in my tracks, pressing my back against the wall in the hallway. What about Julian? Vivian asked, her voice trembling. Can he ask some of his investor friends? Carter scoffed loudly. Julian doesn't have any investor friends. He's an idiot who just bought a Ferrari on my credit line. The bank is threatening to foreclose on this house. Vivian. If the Bar Association finds out about the client funds, I will go to prison. Silence hung in the air. Then my mother spoke again. Her voice dropped to a sinister whisper. What about Mason? My heart hammered in my chest. Mason won't give me a dime, Carter growled. He's too stingy. He's sitting on millions from his grandmother's inheritance, living like a rat in that downtown apartment, and he won't even help his own father. I didn't say we should ask him, Vivian said coldly. I'm saying, Mason hasn't been acting right lately, Carter. He's withdrawn. He doesn't socialize. He works weird hours. He's clearly depressed. Maybe even delusional. I squeezed my eyes shut. I knew exactly where she was going with this. If he is legally incapacitated, Vivian continued smoothly, as his next of kin, you would be granted power of attorney. You could take control of the trust fund. You could manage the inheritance for his own good. We could save the house, save your firm, and get Mason the help he needs. Carter didn't object. He didn't say, no, he's my son, I won't do that. Instead, I heard the sound of ice clinking against a glass. Dr. David owes me a favor, Carter said slowly. I got him out of that messy malpractice suit 5 years ago. He's a licensed psychiatrist. If he signs an affidavit stating Mason is a danger to himself, we call the police. Vivian finished the thought. A 51-50 hold. 3 days in a psychiatric ward. Long enough for you to file an emergency conservatorship with Judge Samuel. I couldn't listen anymore. I backed away silently, my rubber-soled shoes making no noise on the hardwood floor. I slipped out the front door and walked to my car. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so pure and white-hot it burned my throat. My own parents, my mother and father were plotting to lock me in a psychiatric hospital, strip away my human rights, and steal my inheritance just to pay off their own greedy mistakes. They thought I was weak. They thought I was a quiet, passive little boy who would just break down and surrender. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They wanted a war. I was going to give them a massacre. It happened on a Tuesday. The rain was coming down in sheets, beating against the windows of my apartment. I was sitting at my kitchen island at 11:30 p.m., drinking black coffee and running a complex data analysis for a new tech client. My apartment was spotless, quiet, and completely normal. Suddenly, a heavy, aggressive pounding echoed through my front door. It wasn't a friendly knock. It was the kind of knock that demanded entry. I frowned, saving my work on the laptop. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Standing in the dimly lit hallway were two police officers. One of them had his hand resting near his duty belt. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. "Can I help you, officers?" I asked, keeping my voice calm and polite. The older officer, a guy with a thick mustache and a nameplate that read Wyatt, looked me up and down. His eyes darted past my shoulder, scanning my apartment for signs of chaos. "Mason Caldwell?" "Yes, that's me." Officer Wyatt pulled a folded yellow document from his jacket pocket. "Mr. Caldwell, we received an emergency call from your family. We have a 5,150 involuntary psychiatric hold order signed by a licensed physician. We need you to step out into the hallway and come with us." The air left my lungs. Even though I knew they were planning something, hearing the words out loud felt like getting hit in the chest with a sledgehammer. A 5150 hold. They actually did it. They actually pulled the trigger. "A psychiatric hold?" I repeated, making sure to keep my hands visible and open. "Officer, I assure you there has been a massive misunderstanding. I am perfectly fine." The younger officer stepped forward, his face stern. "Sir, the affidavit states you are suffering from severe delusions, that you are a threat to your own safety, and that you have been displaying erratic, violent behavior. We don't want any trouble. Please just come quietly to the hospital for an evaluation." Violent behavior? I hadn't raised my voice in 3 years. "May I see the document, please?" I asked. Wyatt hesitated, then handed me the paper. I read the terrifying words printed on the official letterhead. Patient exhibits severe paranoid schizophrenia, severe financial delusions, immediate risk of self-harm. Recommendation: 72-hour involuntary committal. If they took me tonight, Carter would be in front of a judge by tomorrow morning. He would freeze my accounts. He would drain my inheritance. I would be trapped in a sterile room, pumped full of sedatives, while my family dismantled my life. I felt a cold sweat break out on my neck. I was standing on the absolute edge of the abyss. One wrong move, one raised voice, one sign of panic, and the cops would tackle me to the floor and drag me out in handcuffs. That would be all the proof Carter needed to show the court I was unhinged. I took a slow, deep breath. I let the analytical, forensic side of my brain take complete control. "Officer Wyatt," I said, my voice steady, professional, and entirely rational. "I understand you are just doing your job, but please look at me. Look at my apartment." I stepped aside, gesturing to the brightly lit, perfectly organized living room. "I am currently in the middle of a conference call with overseas clients. I don't drink. I don't do drugs. This report is a malicious fabrication filed by my father, who is currently facing bankruptcy and is trying to seize my grandfather's trust fund." Wyatt frowned, looking at my clean apartment, the glowing laptop with financial charts, and my calm demeanor. He looked at the yellow paper, then back at me. He was starting to doubt the call. "Sir," Wyatt said slowly, "a doctor signed this. Dr. David Miller." I nodded. "Dr. David Miller is my father's golf partner. I haven't seen Dr. Miller in 7 years. I can prove it." I asked the officers if I could grab my laptop. Wyatt nodded, keeping a close eye on me. I walked to the kitchen island, turned the laptop around, and opened my home security software. "I have motion-activated cameras at my front door and inside my living room," I explained, clicking the mouse. "You can review the footage for the last 6 months. You will not find a single instance of violent behavior, self-harm, or anyone named Dr. David Miller entering this apartment to evaluate me." The younger officer leaned in, watching the screen. "Furthermore," I said, opening an encrypted audio file, My father is a lawyer named Carter Caldwell. He is currently payroll insolvent. I have an audio recording from 3 weeks ago, captured securely, where he and my mother actively discuss using a fake 5150 hold to gain power of attorney and steal my inheritance. I hit play. The clear, unmistakable voice of my father filled the room. Dr. David owes me a favor. If he signs an affidavit stating Mason is a danger to himself, we call the police. A 5150 hold. Officer Wyatt's jaw tightened. He looked at his partner. The younger cop shook his head in disgust. Falsifying a police report and forging a medical psychiatric hold was a serious felony. Mr. Caldwell, Wyatt said, his tone completely shifting from authoritative to sympathetic. I am incredibly sorry to have disturbed you. This is clearly a civil matter, and frankly, it looks like extortion. We are not taking you anywhere. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Thank you, officers. I appreciate your professionalism. Wyatt took the yellow paper back. I'll be filing a report on this. Falsifying a 5150 is a crime. If you want to press charges against Dr. Miller and your father, I will personally testify. Not yet, I said quietly. I handle my own audits, but I will keep your card. The officers left. I locked the door and leaned my forehead against the cool wood. My heart was beating so fast I felt dizzy. They had tried to lock me in a cage. They had tried to erase me. I walked back to my laptop and saw an unread email in my secondary inbox. It was from a private investigator I had hired a week ago to keep tabs on Julian. The email contained photos. Julian, smiling, signing paperwork at a high-end auto dealership, extending the loan on his Ferrari. Attached was an intercepted text message from Julian to Carter. Make sure the psycho gets locked up tonight. The Ferrari payment is due Friday. Don't screw this up, Dad. Julian wasn't just a bystander. He was the mastermind. He was pushing Carter to destroy me just so he could keep his stupid sports car. I grabbed my phone. I had to know if there was even a shred of humanity left in the woman who gave birth to me. I dialed my mother's cell phone. It was 1 a.m. She answered on the second ring, her voice breathless and fake panicked. Mason? Oh my God. Mason, where are you? Are you at the hospital? The police called us. They said you were having an episode. Mom. I cut her off. My voice was like ice. The cops are gone. I'm sitting in my apartment. I showed them the audio recording of you and Dad planning this whole thing. Dead silence on the line. The fake panic instantly vanished. Mason, Vivian said, her voice dropping into that low, manipulative tone she always used. Listen to me. You are confused. You are sick. Your father is just trying to protect you from yourself. By forging a psychiatric hold? I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. By trying to lock me in a ward so you can steal my inheritance to pay for Julian's Ferrari? How dare you? Vivian hissed. Julian is your brother. He is struggling. Your father's firm is in a little bit of a cash flow bind, yes, but we are a family. We share our burdens. You are sitting on millions of dollars doing nothing, while we are losing sleep over bills. You are selfish, Mason. You have always been a cold, ungrateful boy. A physical ache flared in my chest, but I forced it down. So, to get the money, you decided to destroy my life. You decided to tell the world I was insane. Vivian started crying. The fake, weaponized tears she used to win every argument. We just need the money, Mason. Please, just sign the power of attorney over to your father. Let Julian manage the trust. We will make sure you are taken care of. Please, don't break this family apart. She was actually blaming me. She was trying to make me feel guilty for surviving their assassination attempt. You broke this family, Mom, I said softly. And now, I am going to break you. I hung up the phone. I didn't block her number. I just set the phone face down on the counter. The last tiny piece of love I had for my parents died in that exact moment. It withered away to dust and blew away. I was no longer a son. I was an auditor, and my family's ledger was deeply in the red. I didn't sleep that night. I brewed another pot of coffee, opened my encrypted drives, and started drafting the blueprint for their total destruction. If Carter wanted to play high-stakes legal games, I was going to show him how a forensic accountant plays the board. The next morning, I met my best friend and business partner, Nathan, at a quiet diner downtown. Nathan was a brilliant corporate strategist, the kind of guy who could find a legal loophole in a brick wall. He was also the only person I trusted. I slid a manila folder across the sticky diner table. Nathan opened it, scanning the forged 5150 document, the financial ledgers from Carter's firm, and the photos of Julian's Ferrari. Nathan whistled low, taking a sip of his coffee. Wow, your dad is a piece of work. Forging a psych hold? Mason, you could take this to the district attorney right now. He'd lose his law license by Friday and face jail time. Too fast, I said, staring out the window at the rainy street. Jail is too easy. If I just turn him in, he plays the martyr. He goes on the news, cries about his sick son framing him, and files for bankruptcy. He escapes the debt. Julian keeps the car. Vivian plays the victim. No. I looked back at Nathan, my eyes dead serious. I don't just want him disbarred. I want to take everything he values. I want the firm. I want the house. I want the cars. I want to humiliate him so profoundly that he can never look down on anyone ever again. Nathan grinned. It was a dangerous, predatory smile. Okay, I'm listening. What's the play? We are incorporating a new holding company, I said, pulling out a fresh legal pad. Today, fast-track it through Delaware. Hide the ownership structure behind two shell LLCs. Total anonymity. What are we calling it? Nathan asked, clicking his pen. Vanguard Holdings, I replied. Vanguard will be a private equity firm. And Vanguard's first official business move will be acquiring toxic debt in the legal sector. Nathan stopped writing. He looked up at me, his eyes wide as he realized what I was suggesting. Mason, you want to buy your dad's debt? Not just buy it, I said. I want to own him. I hired Detective Gray, a private investigator. He found out Carter is defaulting on a massive loan with First National Bank. The bank is getting ready to call the loan and seize the firm's assets. Carter is desperate for a lifeline. We are going to throw him an anvil disguised as a life preserver. We spent the next 4 hours mapping out the corporate structure. We registered Vanguard Holdings. I wired $3 million of my grandmother's inheritance into Vanguard's operating accounts. I wasn't blowing the money. I was investing it in karma. By noon, Vanguard was a real, legally binding corporate entity. By 2 p.m., I had a meeting scheduled with the director of First National Bank. The bank director's name was Matthew. He was a balding man in a cheap suit who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. When I walked into his office representing Vanguard Holdings, he looked at me with skepticism. But when I showed him the proof of funds, his attitude completely changed. Mr. Caldwell, Matthew said, sweating nervously. I have to be honest. The debt portfolio for Caldwell and Associates is toxic waste. Carter Caldwell is completely unreliable. He misses payments, he threatens my loan officers with lawsuits, and his firm is practically insolvent. Why would a private equity group want to buy this garbage? Vanguard sees potential in distressed assets. I lied smoothly, sitting comfortably in the leather chair. We specialize in aggressive restructuring. We are willing to buy the entire debt portfolio, all his loans, his credit lines, the mortgage on his office equipment, at 90 cents on the dollar. Cash. Today. Matthew looked like he was going to cry tears of joy. He was the unexpected traitor in Carter's life. The guy who smiled in Carter's face but was willing to sell him out to a stranger in a heartbeat just to clear his own spreadsheet. I'll have the transfer papers drawn up immediately, Matthew said, shaking my hand vigorously. Within 48 hours, the transaction was complete. First National Bank was out of the picture. Vanguard Holdings was now the sole creditor for Caldwell and Associates. Every computer, every desk, every client file in my father's office legally had a lien on it owned by me. But I knew Carter. If he found out his debt was sold to a faceless corporation, he might panic and file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy to protect himself. I needed him comfortable. I needed him arrogant. I needed him to think he was winning. So I had Nathan, acting as the COO of Vanguard, make a phone call to Carter. Nathan pitched Carter a fairy tale. He told Carter that Vanguard was an angel investor group looking to back aggressive, high-profile lawyers. He told Carter that Vanguard admired his legal mind and wanted to inject fresh capital into his firm to help him expand. Carter swallowed the bait whole. His massive ego wouldn't let him question why a mysterious firm wanted to give him money. He just assumed the universe was finally recognizing his genius. 2 days later, Nathan sent the contract over to Carter's office. It was a proposal for a $650,000 cash injection. It looked like a standard private equity investment, but the devil was entirely in the details. I drafted the contract myself. I used my knowledge of corporate law to bury a massive, lethal trap in the fine print. Paragraph 12, Section B. It was a cross-collateralization clause combined with a personal guarantee. It basically stated that if the firm defaulted on the loan, or if the guarantor Carter committed an act of moral turpitude or public disparagement against Vanguard or its agents, the debt would instantly accelerate. It meant the entire $650,000, plus all the old debt Vanguard bought from the bank, would be due within 24 hours. And because of the personal guarantee, if the firm couldn't pay, Vanguard had the right to seize Carter's personal assets, his pension, his house, Vivian's jewelry, and, most importantly, Julian's precious Ferrari, which Carter had co-signed for. I sat in my apartment watching the secure digital portal. I saw the notification pop up. Document opened by C. Caldwell. 10 minutes later, another notification. Document signed. He didn't even read it. He didn't have his bulldog lawyer, Eli, review the clauses. Carter was so blinded by his own greed, so desperate for the cash, that he just scrolled to the bottom and slapped his digital signature on his own death warrant. I authorized the wire transfer. $650,000 hit Carter's operating account. What did he do with the money? Did he pay the employees he owed? Did he settle the malpractice lawsuits? No. My private investigator, Gray, sent me photos the next day. Carter used the money to pay for a massive renovation of his country club locker room to impress his friends. He bought Vivian a diamond necklace. He paid off the late fees on Julian's Ferrari. He was partying with my money. He was celebrating his victory, completely unaware that he had just wrapped a titanium noose around his own neck and handed me the rope. With the financial trap set, I needed to secure the physical battlefield. Carter's law firm rented the entire third floor of an old, historic downtown building called the Meridian. It was an aging brick structure, slightly run down, but it had good bones. Carter always complained about the building, mocking it as a dump, but he stayed because the rent was cheap. I contacted a commercial real estate broker named Luke. I instructed Luke to approach the owner of the Meridian on behalf of Vanguard Real Estate, a subsidiary I created. We made a cash offer that was 20% above market value. The owner accepted immediately. Within a month, Vanguard owned the building. I owned the building. I fired the old, lazy property management company and hired a strict, aggressive new team. I spent $500,000 renovating the lobby, upgrading the security systems, and fixing the elevators. But the most important renovation was the top floor, the penthouse suite. I gutted the penthouse and built a massive, modern, state-of-the-art office and living space for myself. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, biometric locks, and a private elevator. I moved out of my small apartment and moved into the Meridian. I was literally living right above my father's head. I would stand by my window with a cup of coffee, looking down at the street below. Every morning at 8:30 a.m., I watched Carter pull up in his leased BMW. I watched him bark orders at the valet. I watched him strut into the building like he owned the place. He had no idea that the roof over his head, the floor beneath his Italian leather shoes, and the very air conditioning he was breathing all belonged to the son he had tried to lock in an asylum. To throw him off my scent, I kept a small mailbox in the lobby, Unit 4B. It was just a drop box, but if anyone looked at the building directory, it looked like Mason Caldwell was just a lowly tenant renting a tiny studio in the back. The stage was completely set. The pieces were perfectly positioned on the board. All I had to do was wait for him to make a move. I didn't have to wait long. 2 months after Vanguard bought his debt, Carter filed the petition in family court. He filed for an emergency conservatorship, claiming I was mentally incompetent and unfit to manage my grandmother's inheritance. He attached a newly forged letter from Dr. David. He was making his final, desperate grab for my money. He thought he was bringing me to the slaughterhouse. He didn't know he was stepping into a courtroom where I owned the judge's gavel, the building, and his entire existence. Which brings us right back to that courtroom, where Judge Samuel was staring at my father over the rim of his glasses, asking the question that would end Carter's life as he knew it. You really don't know who he is, do you? Judge Samuel's words hung in the air like a guillotine waiting to drop. He had just asked my father if he really knew who I was. Carter was completely derailed. His carefully rehearsed speech about my supposed insanity died in his throat. Carter scoffed, a nervous, dismissive sound. He adjusted his silk tie, trying to reclaim his authority in the room. Your Honor, I know exactly who he is. He is my son. He is a sick, unstable young man who lives in squalor. Have you seen the address on his mail? He lives in the Meridian. It is a crumbling brick pile downtown. He refuses to let his own mother visit because he is ashamed of how he lives. It is a studio apartment in a building that probably has rats in the walls. He cannot even afford a doorman. And you expect me to believe he is competent to manage a multi-million-dollar inheritance. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep my expression completely flat. The Meridian. He called it a crumbling brick pile. I called it a historic restoration project. And he was right about the rats when I first bought the building 6 months ago. But I hired the exterminators. I hired the contractors. I renovated the lobby and I took the entire top floor for myself. He thought I was a tenant in Unit 4B. He didn't know 4B was just the mail drop I kept to throw him off the scent. He stood there, chest heaving, triumphant. He thought he had delivered the killing blow. He thought he had exposed me as a fraud. He didn't realize that by insulting the crumbling brick pile, he had just insulted his own landlord in open court. Judge Samuel slowly took off his reading glasses. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked bored, and that was so much worse for Carter. Mr. Caldwell, the judge said, his voice quiet and dangerously calm, I am going to give you exactly 10 seconds to sit down and shut your mouth, because if you say one more word about the defendant's mental state, I will hold you in contempt so fast your head will spin. Carter opened his mouth to argue, but his lawyer, Eli, physically yanked him down into his chair. Eli was terrified. He was still staring at the document the bailiff had handed him. Good, the judge said. He picked up the next document in the stack on his desk. Now that we have established your very colorful opinion, let us look at the facts. Because according to this deed, the crumbling brick pile you just mentioned, he doesn't just live there. Judge Samuel slid a single piece of heavy parchment paper across the polished wood of his bench. The bailiff retrieved it and handed it to Eli. Eli's eyes darted across the page, his breathing growing shallow. The Meridian, Judge Samuel stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. Unit 4B is indeed a mail drop. Mr. Caldwell, you were right about that detail. But Mason Caldwell does not rent it. He owns the building, the entire building, including the commercial suites on the 3rd floor. The suites your law firm currently occupies. Carter blinked. He looked at the paper in Eli's hands, then at me, then back at the judge. His brain was violently misfiring. He could not process the information. It went against everything he believed about the world and his place in it. That is impossible, Carter stammered, his voice losing its booming theatrical quality. My landlord is a corporate entity. I pay rent to Vanguard Real Estate. I signed the lease renewal last month. I have never written a rent check to my son. Vanguard, the judge repeated, tasting the word. He reached into a thick manila folder on his desk. Now, that is a name that appears quite frequently in these financial files. Vanguard Real Estate, Vanguard Capital, Vanguard Holdings. I watched Carter's eyes widen. He recognized that last name. Vanguard Holdings was the private equity firm that had just injected $650,000 into his failing business. It was the only thing keeping him from total ruin. Judge Samuel pulled out a massive, heavy binder. The spine cracked loudly as he opened it to the first tab. According to your firm's financial disclosures, Judge Samuel continued, Vanguard Holdings is your primary investor. In fact, looking at these ledgers, they are the only reason your firm is still solvent. They bought out your toxic debt from First National Bank, and then they injected $650,000 into your operating account 2 months ago. Is that correct? Carter straightened his posture, frantically trying to find a shred of familiar ground. This was business. He understood business. Or at least he thought he did. Yes, Your Honor, Carter said, forcing a confident tone. Vanguard is a private equity angel investor. They saw the massive potential in my firm. They recognized my legal acumen and decided to back a winner. They saved us. He turned his head and sneered directly at me. Unlike my son, who wouldn't know a capital investment if it hit him in the face. Vanguard believes in me. I watched him spin his web of lies. It was almost tragic. He was standing in a federal courtroom, bragging about the rope I had just sold him to hang himself with. He genuinely believed some Wall Street billionaires were deeply impressed by his mediocre divorce and custody settlements. Vanguard believes in you, the judge echoed dryly. He turned the heavy binder around so Carter could see the incorporation documents displayed on the first page. That is fascinating, Mr. Caldwell, because according to these federal incorporation documents, the sole incorporator, the chief executive officer, and the primary signatory for Vanguard Holdings is Mason Caldwell. The air left the room. It didn't hiss out slowly. It simply vanished. Carter stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. It was my signature. The exact same signature I used on the birthday cards he threw in the trash. The exact same signature I put on the lease renewal he had blindly signed last month. No, Carter whispered, his face contorted. No, this is a trick. This is fraud. He looked at Eli, his face twisted into a mask of desperate, cornered arrogance. Eli, tell the judge this is a forgery. My son does not run a private equity firm. He plays with spreadsheets in a rat-infested apartment. He doesn't have the brain capacity to pull off a corporate acquisition. Eli just stared at the desk. He wouldn't look at Carter. He wouldn't look at me. He just slowly shook his head. The federal seal is real, Carter. The notary stamp is authenticated. He owns it. He owns Vanguard. Carter ripped his arm away from his lawyer. Get off me, Eli. I am not going to sit here while my son makes a mockery of this court. Carter turned back to the judge, his confidence violently morphing into raw aggression. He pointed a shaking finger at me again, jabbing the air. Look at him. Look at that cheap suit. Look at those scuffed shoes. Does that look like a CEO to you? Successful people do not live like refugees, Your Honor. He is lying. This is a symptom of his mental illness. I glanced down at my shoes. He was right about one thing. They were slightly scuffed. I had scuffed them climbing through a warehouse window last week to verify inventory for a client's audit. I didn't replace them because I didn't care. Unlike Carter, I didn't need to wear my net worth on my feet. True power doesn't need to scream for attention. Mr. Caldwell, Judge Samuel warned, his voice turning to gravel. I will not warn you again about your outbursts. But Carter was entirely beyond reason now. The reality of the situation was too devastating for his ego to accept. He thought he had found the ultimate flaw in my plan. A manic, unhinged grin began to spread across his face. Wait a minute, Carter said, his voice rising in a bizarre, triumphant pitch. Wait just a minute. I see what this is. You thought you were so smart, didn't you, Mason? Carter laughed aloud. It was a wet, ugly sound that bounced off the wood paneling, stripping away the very last shred of dignity he had left. He looked at Judge Samuel with the kind of condescending pity usually reserved for a confused child. Your Honor, my son just admitted to a massive regulatory violation in open court. Carter declared, smoothing his tie with shaking hands. He just handed us the victory. Eli made a sound like a dying animal. He grabbed Carter's sleeve, his knuckles turning white. Carter, he hissed. His voice trembling so hard it was audible. 3 rose back in the gallery. Carter, stop talking. Do not do this. Please, just sit down. Shut up, Eli, Carter snapped. He turned his attention entirely to me, his eyes wide and wild. You stupid boy. You tried to play big shot, but you didn't do your homework. You are not a lawyer, Mason. You are just a glorified bookkeeper. And according to the American Bar Association, Rule 5.4, non-lawyers cannot hold equity in a legal practice. It is strictly illegal. Carter slammed his hand on the table, leaning forward as if he were delivering a closing argument to a jury. You cannot own my firm. The entire contract is void. You just broke the law to pretend you were important. I am going to have you investigated for fraud. I will take every penny of that inheritance you stole from Julian and me, and I will see you behind bars. He looked up at the judge, practically vibrating with victory. Dismiss this fake corporation, Your Honor. Rule 5.4 protects me. He is not my boss. He is a criminal. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I let his words echo in the silent room. I let him taste the absolute peak of his false victory. Then, I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the defense table. For the first time that morning, I spoke. You are right, Carter, I said softly, my voice perfectly steady. Carter's manic grin widened. He thought I was surrendering. I stood up. I walked slowly around the defense table, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor with a deliberate, rhythmic sound. Eli shrank back in his chair as I approached, clutching his briefcase against his chest like a shield. But Carter didn't retreat. He puffed out his chest, still clinging desperately to his delusion that a legal technicality would save him. I stopped right in front of him. I was close enough to smell the stale scotch on his breath from the night before, close enough to see the heavy sweat beading on his upper lip. I cannot own equity in your law firm, I said, my voice cutting through the stale air of the courtroom like a scalpel. I know Rule 5.4. I memorized the ABA model rules before I even filed the paperwork to incorporate Vanguard. But you didn't read the contract you signed last month, did you? Carter's smile faltered. A microscopic flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. What are you talking about? You bought the firm. I didn't invest in you, Carter, I said cold and clear. I bought your debt. I motioned to the judge. Judge Samuel nodded and handed me the thick file of loan agreements. I tossed the heavy file onto the table right in front of Carter. It landed with a loud thud. 2 years ago, you were drowning, I continued, pacing slowly in front of him. 3 banks had rejected your loan applications. You were completely payroll insolvent. You were about to lose your license for commingling client funds to pay your country club dues. You lost that massive custody battle because you were too busy playing golf to file the paperwork. You were a dead man walking. Carter's face twitched violently. That was temporary. A cash flow issue. It wasn't equity, I said evenly, staring directly into his eyes. It was insolvency. Vanguard bought your bank loan, your credit line, and the lien on your office equipment. Then we extended you $650,000 on a senior secured basis. I am not your business partner, Carter. I am your senior secured creditor. I don't own your firm. I own the collateral. Eli put his head in his hands. He understood perfectly. Every chair, every laptop, every single client file belongs to me if you default on the loan, I said. I reached down, flipped open the contract on the table, and pointed to a specific highlighted section. Paragraph 12. Section B. Default on character. It is a standard moral turpitude and disparagement clause. Insulting your guarantor or questioning their competency in a recorded public hearing triggers immediate acceleration of the debt. I tapped the paper. You just spent the last 20 minutes calling me mentally incompetent, an embarrassment, and a fraud on the official court record. You defaulted. The loan is due. All of it. I checked my watch. Right now. Carter's face drained of the last drop of color. He looked like he was going to vomit. I don't have that money. You know I don't have that money. I have 12 grand in the operating account and a maxed out credit card. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, as the sole proprietor of Vanguard Holdings, I am officially calling the loan. I request an immediate enforcement order to seize all corporate assets of Caldwell and Associates to satisfy the debt. Eli rose to his feet, his voice shaking. Your Honor, please. If he takes the equipment and the files, the firm dies today. My clients will be ruined. I accept your resignation, Eli, I said flatly without looking at him. Carter finally exploded. The polished lawyer facade completely shattered. He looked like a trapped animal. He grabbed his phone from the table, his thumbs flying across the screen. I planned for this, Carter shouted, his voice cracking with hysteria. I knew you were plotting a takeover. I have a server failsafe. I am filing Chapter 7 bankruptcy right now. Progress bar is literally on my screen. Liquidation. Automatic stay. You get nothing, Mason. The firm is dead, but you cannot touch me. He leaned back, breathing heavily, gripping the phone. Checkmate, he thought. Bankruptcy protects the company from creditors. I just shook my head. It was almost sad how predictable he was. I reached into my inside jacket pocket and pulled out one last sheet of paper. Bankruptcy protects companies, Carter, I said quietly. It does not protect guarantors. Carter blinked, the phone freezing in his hand. What? You didn't read the fine print? I said, placing the paper on top of his phone. Paragraph 4, Section C. Cross-collateralization with a personal guarantee. You were so desperate for the cash you signed a personal guarantee. If the business goes bankrupt and the assets do not cover the debt, the remaining balance transfers directly to your personal estate. Total, crushing silence fell over the room. You didn't bankrupt the firm, Carter, I said, delivering the final blow. You bankrupted yourself. I now have legal claims on your house, the vacation cottage, your retirement pension, your country club membership, and, of course, the loan you co-signed for Julian's Ferrari. I leaned in close so only he could hear me. I own you. Judge Samuel brought his wooden gavel down with a sharp, echoing crack. This hearing is dismissed with prejudice. The petition for conservatorship is denied. Asset seizure for Vanguard Holdings is granted. Mr. Caldwell, you have 24 hours to vacate your personal residence. Commercial eviction at the Meridian is immediate. Eli packed up his briefcase and practically sprinted out of the courtroom without saying a single word to his client. Carter remained frozen in his chair, small, stunned, and completely broken. He stared blindly at the wall, watching the illusion of his grand legacy evaporate into thin air. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment 1 below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. I walked out of the courtroom without looking back. My shoes clicked against the marble floors of the hallway, a steady rhythm of closure. I didn't feel a massive rush of adrenaline or overwhelming triumph. I just felt relief. The heavy, suffocating weight that had been pressing down on my chest for 29 years was finally gone. The tumor had been completely excised. That evening, I stood in the lobby of the Meridian building with 2 armed security guards and a commercial locksmith. We rode the elevator up to the 3rd floor. The glass doors of Caldwell and Associates were locked, but inside, the lights were still on. I watched without emotion as the locksmith drilled out the heavy brass lock. The door swung open. The office was empty. Carter hadn't even bothered to come back to pack up his personal desk. He had just run. I walked over to the receptionist's desk. Mounted on the wall was a heavy bronze nameplate that read, Carter Caldwell Senior Partner. I grabbed the edge of the plate and pulled. It ripped off the drywall with a satisfying crunch. I dropped the heavy metal plate into a cardboard liquidation box on the floor. The liquidation team would handle the rest tomorrow. They would auction off the leather chairs, the mahogany desks, the computers. I wouldn't profit from this, and I didn't care. The $650,000 I spent wasn't a business investment. It was the price of my absolute freedom. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The caller ID flashed, Julian. I answered it, putting the phone to my ear but remaining silent. Mason! Julian screamed into the receiver. He sounded hysterical, completely unhinged. Background noise indicated he was standing on a street corner. Mason, what the hell did you do? A tow truck just pulled up to my apartment. They took the Ferrari. They showed me a repo order with Vanguard's name on it. You cannot do this. I need that car. You don't need a Ferrari, Julian, I said calmly. You need a job. The free ride is over. You vindictive psycho, Julian yelled, his voice cracking. Dad is having a breakdown. Mom is packing suitcases. They are taking the house, Mason. Our house. You have to fix this. Call the bank. Tell them it was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake, I replied. It was an audit, and your accounts are completely drained. I hung up the phone. A second later, a text message popped up from Vivian. It was a long block of text filled with crying emojis. Mason, please. You are destroying your family. We have nowhere to go. Have mercy on your father. We love you. Please call me back. I stared at the message. I thought about the night she calmly suggested locking me in a psychiatric ward so they could steal my grandmother's money. I thought about the total lack of mercy she showed me. I didn't reply. I pressed the settings button on her contact profile. Not blocked. Deleted. I deleted Julian. I deleted Carter. They were no longer family members in my phone. They were just random, disconnected numbers. I erased them from my digital life just as thoroughly as I had erased them from my financial life. I walked to the elevator, rode it up to the penthouse, and poured myself a glass of cold water. I stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city skyline. The city lights flickered in the darkness. I took a deep breath, inhaling the absolute, unbroken silence of my home. Sometimes you don't have to destroy a toxic family. Sometimes you just have to give them enough rope, step back, and let them hang themselves. A year passed. Time really is the ultimate equalizer. Without the constant drain of Carter's manipulations and Vivian's emotional guilt trips, my life accelerated in ways I never thought possible. Vanguard Holdings evolved from a shell company designed for revenge into a legitimate, highly profitable corporate auditing firm. Nathan and I expanded our operations. We moved out of the Meridian building and leased a massive commercial space in the financial district. We hired a staff of 50 accountants and legal analysts. My federal contracts doubled. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. I still lived in the penthouse at the Meridian. I liked the building. It was a physical reminder of where I started and what I had overcome. I kept Unit 4B as a mail drop just for the irony of it. I spent my weekends reading, traveling, and occasionally playing terrible rounds of golf with Nathan. I didn't buy a fleet of sports cars. I upgraded my old sedan to a reliable SUV, but that was it. True wealth isn't about showing off. It is about the quiet comfort of knowing you never have to ask anyone for permission to exist. I was happy, actually genuinely happy. My mind was sharp, my conscience was clear, and my circle of friends was small but fiercely loyal. But karma has a funny way of finishing the paperwork, even when you have already closed the file. I didn't actively seek out information about my former family. I didn't care enough to stalk their social media. But in the legal and financial circles of a city, gossip travels fast. 6 months after the courtroom incident, I ran into Eli at a coffee shop near the courthouse. He looked older, more tired, but a lot less stressed. He bought my coffee and we sat down for a few minutes. Carter got disbarred, Eli told me, stirring his black coffee. The Bar Association investigated the Caldwell and Associates bankruptcy. They found the ledgers where he commingled client funds with his personal accounts. They stripped his license permanently. He narrowly avoided prison time by pleading poverty and claiming severe mental distress. I took a sip of my coffee. Where is he now? He's working retail, Eli said, shaking his head in disbelief, selling luxury watches at a department store in the suburbs. Vivian left him. She filed for divorce as soon as the bank foreclosed on the big house. She moved to Florida to live with her sister. Last I heard, she was working as a receptionist at a dental clinic. It made sense. Vivian loved the status of being a wealthy lawyer's wife. Without the money, Carter was useless to her. And Julian? I asked. Eli chuckled darkly. Julian crashed and burned. After you repossessed the Ferrari, Chloe dumped him. She realized he was completely broke. Julian tried to launch another fake tech startup, but nobody would fund him without his dad's signature. He's currently waiting tables at a steakhouse downtown and living in a rented room. I nodded slowly. It wasn't a tragedy. It was just gravity. They had built their entire lives on a foundation of lies, entitlement, and stolen money. Once the foundation was removed, the collapse was inevitable. And as for Dr. David, the golf buddy who falsified my medical records, Officer Wyatt kept his promise. An anonymous tip containing the audio recording of Carter's plot was mailed to the state medical board. Dr. David's license was suspended, pending a massive federal investigation into insurance fraud. He would never practice medicine again. I thanked Eli for the coffee and walked back to my office. I didn't feel the need to gloat. The ledger was perfectly balanced. People often ask me if I regret what I did. They ask if I ever feel guilty for dismantling my own family. Society teaches us that blood is thicker than water, that you have to forgive your parents no matter what they do to you. But I learned a very different lesson. Respect is a two-way street, and love should never be a weapon used to control you. Carter and Vivian didn't see me as a son. They saw me as an ATM. They saw me as an obstacle to their own selfish desires. When they tried to strip away my sanity and my freedom, they broke the social contract of family. I didn't destroy them. I simply stopped being their victim. I used the very tools Carter worshipped, money, contracts, and the law, to reflect his true nature back at him. Power isn't about screaming the loudest in a courtroom. Power isn't a shiny red Ferrari or a country club membership paid for with stolen money. Real power is the quiet, unbreakable confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you are capable of building with your own two hands. Real power is standing in a storm, completely silent, watching the people who tried to break you shatter against your walls. I am Mason Caldwell. I am not an embarrassment. I am not mentally incompetent. I am a man who rebuilt his life from the ashes of a burning bridge. And the view from the top of the Meridian is absolutely beautiful. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a long journey, but I appreciate every single one of you who stayed with me. I hope this resonated with you in some way. Family dynamics can be incredibly complicated, and sometimes the hardest thing to do is to walk away from the people you are supposed to trust the most. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect your own peace and your own future? Let me know down in the comments. I read as many as I can. Now, for those of you who made it to the very end, I have a special request. I call this the 1% Club. If you are still listening, I want you to go down to the comments and type the letter W. W stands for winner. It is a secret sign to let me know you are part of the amazing group of people who have the attention span and the heart to listen to a story from beginning to end. You guys are the real winners. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, and don't forget to follow the channel so we can continue this journey together. I have many more stories to share. Until next time, stay strong, trust your instincts, and never let anyone tell you what your worth is.